Thank you. So when we talk about Judaism, we have to understand it on a slightly different frame. And actually, I was just having a conversation with, where are you? Yes, we were just talking about sort of what does religion mean. And it came up, I think Will made mention of this as well. When we talk about religion, we have to look at it with a broader stroke of what religion is. So much of how people understand religion is based on Christianity because that has been the dominant language of what religion means in the United States. But in reality, the word religion has this notion of religios, the reconnecting of the ligaments. The L-I-G-N part is like is a doorway and entering in, and it's about, or it's about the ligaments. It's about the connective tissue that connects us to one another. So when we talk about religion, we need to think about it with a broader sense than it being about faith or about God or about some sort of outside thing. We learned also in this conversation in both Buddhist and Hindu traditions that so much of when we talk about religion, we're talking about something inside, not some outside thing that we're trying to claim. So I think it's important for us to remember that. And that becomes all the more true in Judaism, where even though, yes, there is a faith system based on an experience of a community that centers around a text, we say that God, Torah, and Israel are one. In old texts, we have that three-part connection, that God, Torah, and Israel are one. And that's a theological statement, obviously. But at the same time, we also have Karl Marx, Emma Goldman, Peter Singer, Gloria Steinem, a long list, Alex Hershaft, I'll add, a long line of Jewish thinkers who have engaged in a very secular way, sometimes even anti-religious like Karl Marx and anti-Jewish like Karl Marx, in movements of change. And so when we talk about Judaism's view on these things, we have to kind of have a more broad sense of what it means. What are Jews really? We're a complex bunch. We don't even know for ourselves who we are. So that's number one. Number two, I wanted to say that we have heard a couple times the term Judeo-Christian. I want to just make a plug for sort of not saying Judeo-Christian, although some people, it's very easy to make the connection between Judaism and Christianity, but Jewish people don't usually say Judeo-Christian. It's been an interesting thing. I think part of that is because, yes, we understand that there's this common Abrahamic tradition, you could say, but we really have a different attitude about a lot of different things, and that just needs to be acknowledged. And also, I'll leave out one of the other things. I want to also say that, so we've gotten a sort of a taste of a lot of religious traditions. We're going to get Christianity as well. I want to just make a plug for a couple others. Unitarian Universalism has a Unitarian Universalist animal ministry, which is a very active group in trying to look at their 7 principles in UU tradition and how they tie to the idea of the inherent worth and dignity of all. And there's a first principle that they are trying to actively change to include sort of an anti-speciesist position. And anybody here involved with the UU tradition? Okay, thank you. Wonderful religious community that really is not Christian, it's not Judaism, it's not Islam. Many are very close to Christianity, but it really is not Christianity either. And I also want to make a plug for Grecia. Where are you, Grecia? Faye Elwood. Oh, there, right in front. So the Quaker community as well has been doing extraordinary work, and Grecia Faye Elwood right here in Pasadena, in Los Angeles, has been doing great work and has shown compassion in the context of the Quaker tradition. I think we want to show thanks to you as well. So, let me give you a little story of my own coming to this work. I became a rabbi in 1997, worked in a couple of places, but eventually found that I wanted to engage in more activist type of work because I learned from my childhood rabbi who railed against those who were anti-busing back in the late 70s. I learned that social justice was at the core of my tradition. And so after a series of experiences along the way, a couple civil disobedience acts in college and whatnot, I ended up landing this great job, which I have to this day, called Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. And the work in Los Angeles is to support worker rights and to organize religious leaders to stand up for low-wage workers primarily, but workers in general. And back, of course, in 2011, we were very prominent in Los Angeles with the Occupy movement as well. And there was a sense that religions could be powerful tools to move a justice agenda. And that's the basis of CLUE, and that's the work that we do for workers, primarily with unions, but not entirely so. And so in that work, during that time, I knew right before I started that job that eventually I was going to become a vegan. I was vegetarian for a long, long time, always thought I was ethical, and then realized, oh, wait a second, there's a couple of things that I'm not thinking about. And like many of you here, I saw the film Earthlings, learned a little bit more. I saw that great film, Peaceable Kingdom, and I was blown away, and I made for myself, the process was in around 2010, that I would first eliminate those things that I knew were outright dairy or egg. I had already been vegetarian. And then I said, okay, if the first 3 ingredients are dairy or egg, I'll eliminate them. And then the first 5, and then finally I lost all interest in taste, and with the animal rights commitments, I made the final turn to being fully vegan. It took me a little bit of process, but I already had this idea that I wanted to be an ethical person, as I think a lot of people really do, and they would like to see themselves as being ethically consistent. So I went vegan. Now, I lived in this neighborhood in Los Angeles, the Pico Robertson neighborhood, and my next door neighbor, it turned out, had in September this massive truck of battery cages outside of the apartment unit with these poor, I can't even really talk about how miserable the conditions were for these almost entirely hens that were, as the industry will like to say, thank you for pointing out the problem with language, spent hens. These are basically at the end of their productivity for human consumption purposes. And these animals, these poor things, were being used for a ritual that I knew about as a rabbi trained in Jewish tradition. I knew about copper rope, but I didn't know that it was really going to be as ugly and as in my face as it was in the Pico Robertson area in my neighborhood. So a number of us said, oh my gosh, this is terrible. What are we going to do? And so we organized. I came with this background with CLUE, with my work on worker justice, and understood that organizing and political engagement are the ways that we actually change the equation. These are the ways, when we have that asset available to us, we need to use it and to go forward with changing policy, or at least creating enough ruckus and chaos and shame at times that people will change their ways. And this is easy. Come on. You're going to say you're going to bring a whole bunch of animals into the middle of an urban area, and you're going to leave them in the sun, and you're going to deny them water, and you're going to have them in cages packed, crammed together, and you think that people aren't going to be upset about that? So we created a little more ruckus. Long story short, we were really able to stop the explicit way in which this was happening. So basically in Los Angeles now, there's very little of this happening. There's some. I won't say there's none. There is some. But we find ourselves running around trying to find them instead of them being so blatant and open in the way. And out of all of that came the thank you. And out of that experience of organizing and talking to our city council member and pushing within the Jewish community, that's a whole other conversation about cultural sensitivity, which we don't have time to go into. Between all of this and my experience with CLUE, I decided we needed to create a permanent organization, and that's where Faith Action for Animals came in. And so Faith Action for Animals is essentially CLUE, but for animals. It means we're going to take policies and support them for the well-being of animals. We're not going to get too bogged down on purity tests, because the reality is, as I was saying to someone before at the conference, I think there's probably 1% of people who are really evil inclined that want to hurt the animals. There's probably about 4% of us that are saying, stop it. And then there's 95% of the people out there who are just kind of caught in the crossfires and are trying to figure out, how to be consistent with everyone else. They're not immoral, they're not moral, they're just amoral about these issues. So our job is to work with that 95% and move them toward a better way of being. So for my organization, if you're on the board, you have to be vegan. But if you want to engage in the work, if you want to sign on to a letter as a pastor to say no bull hooks in Los Angeles on the elephants, you don't have to be a vegan. You don't even have to be a vegetarian. You just have to show your heart and conscience for the animals. And there's no membership. We're kind of an Ungapachka organization, so that makes it easy. So we have a clarity about our purpose, which is we need to gain the upper hand, and we have more assets out there than I think some of us are aware of. When we're talking politics, we have to find ways to, help people along. As soon as you tell people that fur is created with anal electrocution of the animals, how can they not say this is just wrong? And so we're banking on that, and so far, we haven't done as much as I'd like to do, but hopefully we'll be able to do more. So I want to just go into the Jewish sources a little bit. I want to just say that we know, let me just get organized. Okay, so Judaism. Judaism is a law-based religion. So when we talk about Judaism, my approach is going to be from a legal perspective, and that's a little different than most other religious traditions, except for Islam, that is, of course, well known for its Sharia traditions. We have what's called halakha. So the problem with a law-based religion is that laws come down over centuries, and whereas the vegan movement has been around, I would say, you can find proto-vegan movements or proto-animal rights movements if you go before 200 years, but it's really been within the last 200 years compared to maybe 2 millennia of religious history, maybe 3. So how do you take a religious tradition that has language that's based on really old ways of looking at the world without the advantage of technology and see how it works in a 21st century perspective so that we can actually do as much good with those traditions as imperfect as they are? So I think the best thing that I can do here is not give you a sugar-coated version of Judaism, not give you a perspective that says that Judaism is right on for all animal rights activists. Oh, and by the way, you'll notice in the name it was intentional not to use the word vegan because we're really talking about animals. That is, obviously, to go back to what we were hearing before from Lisa, non-human animals. But that intention is to say that we can do a lot of good here if we are honest about what are the trends within the legal tradition that highlight compassion and outlaw cruelty. And at the same time, recognize that we're not going to be able to fit the square peg into the round hole and pretend like it isn't in the Bible, for instance, that human beings are created separately from all the other earth-bound animals. So I'm an anti-speciesist. I don't believe that we should look at human beings as unique from the other animals on this planet. But at the same time, I've got to grapple with a language and a tradition that suggests that they are. And that's the challenge, I think, of Abrahamic traditions in general. There is a speciesist component that's in there. But I'd rather be honest about it and remind you that good people are able to still move past that and do a lot of good in this world. I also think that if we look at the leadership of so many movements, that's proof that somehow religious traditions are not destroying a sense of the greater good. It just, sometimes people mute the religious language, but are motivated or inspired by it to do a lot of good in the world. So that's the delicate dance that we have to dance when we're talking about how to take old traditions and pour the old wine into new bottles. And that's what that's what this conversation is about. So I would like to share some sources with you. And because I'm 48 and don't really understand PowerPoint, I'm going to hand out a sheet. Now, the sheet will have, I only have 100 copies, and I think there's more than 100 people here, so you may need to share with a couple of folks. I hope that they get fully distributed, but on the top also is my email. So if you don't get a copy, then I am happy to email it to you later. But for the time being, yeah, I know. I'm not a big fan of using paper, but there's a lot jam-packed into this. Oh, and there's a few more. What I'd like to do is go through some of these sources, Jewish sources. By the way, any questions since we're passing out the paper? Questions or comments, quick ones? This is so not a Jewish audience. Okay, yes. So estimates in 2012, the year before we got involved, the question was, what was our impact in terms of kaparot and on eliminating the practice? How many chickens before and how many are there after? There were probably a lot more than we were aware of before, and there's probably a lot more than we're aware of now. But we know that there were about 5,000 chickens being killed within a 5-day period, most of them on one day in 2012, and that explicit group of people doing it, probably, I would say, we're down to maybe a couple hundred. So I would say that that's a success, but of course, we're dealing with an old tradition, and it's very complicated because there are groups that are doing this that come out of the Persian Jewish community in LA that have a very different worldview about why they're doing it and how they have the right to do it than, let's say, Chabad, which has been the bane of all of our animal rights existence on this issue, on the East Coast especially. So we have to understand that we did get the lower hanging fruits. The ones who were doing it more out of superstition, I will say, out of a sense that somehow they were able to, change the world in a way that I would say Chabad is not as committed to. It's a different kind of almost religious identity. So anyway, thanks for the question. Okay, so let's go with the easy stuff, and then we'll get to the hard stuff. The easy stuff. And this is what you love to hear about Judaism, and I would add Christianity as well. The original view. So is everyone within one person of a sheet? If you are not within one person of a sheet, raise your hand. Now, is there a stack of extra sheets somewhere? Okay, pass them back down, and just everyone who wants one can take one. Okay. As we know, as we hear often in the book of Genesis, it says, God said, behold, I have given you every herb yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree that has seed yielding fruit, to you it shall be for food. In other words, in the Garden of Eden, in Nagada Davida, we were a plant-based people, or two people, or one person, depending on how you look at it. Ha-Adam, the human being. Actually, we would translate Adam as the earthling, because Adam means earth. Adamah means earth. So we hear Rashi just confirms that. Rashi is a commentator who's very important to Jewish sources, often quoted at the same time. He lived around 11th century, 1040 to 1105. He says, God did not permit Adam and his wife to kill a creature to eat its flesh. Only every green herb shall they all eat together. And furthermore, a more modern commentator points out, Casuto points out, you are permitted to use this is why it's still speciesist. You are permitted to use the animals and employ them for work, have dominion over them in order to utilize their services for your subsistence, but must not hold their life cheap, nor slaughter them for food. Your natural diet is vegetarian. Okay, so, I'm just telling you like it is here. So that is the original view. And then a disaster, a major calamity happens in the universe according to the Hebrew Bible, namely the Mabul, the flood. And the planet is virtually destroyed. We get the promise of the rainbow. Come on in. Don't be shy. We get the promise of the rainbow, and all of a sudden we hear the world won't be destroyed again. I think a lot of us are wondering if that's true. And there was the reason for the destruction, the flood, according to the Hebrew Bible, is that there had been a great deal of chaos and violence in the world, and that human beings were destroying one another. So Noah and his family, and unfortunately we don't hear about his wife too much, except in Jewish midrash, we call it, in additional sources. They get on this big boat called an ark, and they survive. They're the survivors. But after all of this is over, they get out of the boat, out of the ark, and God, it says, number 2, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, and I would hope the women as well, be fertile and increase and fill the earth. The fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon all the birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, thank you. And upon all the fish of the sea, they are given into your hand. Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. As with the green grasses, I give you all these. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. So continues on and on. But the point of this, according to the rabbis, is that this was seen as a compromise on the part of God. If human beings are naturally as destructive and as murderous toward one another, then instead of hurting human beings, God is granting, according to this tradition, the right for us to eat animals instead, non-human animals instead of killing humans, a way to deal with our violent instinct. Because human beings, according to this rationale, are naturally pretty violent, and out of that violence, we have to have a way to deal with it. It's like punching the wall. So the view is, the response is that we are now permitted to kill animals and to eat them. Not to torture them, not to mutilate them, but to eat them. That's all it really says. Though, as we see, there's an acknowledgement of the sentient nature of the animals because they're going to have fear and dread of human beings. So that's interesting. I would like to posit that as terrible as this piece is, a lot of the Bible is actually, from a biblical scholarship perspective, a lot of the early books of Genesis, a lot of the early stories in Genesis are really about what we call etiological explanations of how the world became the way it is. So why is it that we have so many languages on the planet? Oh, it's because of the Tower of Babel story. How is it that we are eating these animals that are sentient beings that are on some level just like us? Oh, well, this is why, because it was an outlet for human beings to violence. So while the literal word of the text is what it is, it has to be understood that if you see the Bible as being anything any less than perfect, and you acknowledge the fallibility of text, and you can do that as a religious Jew, by the way, then you start to make sense of why things are the way they are. And so that's my explanation for why we have this weird story that contradicts everything that I think all of us stand for here. Okay, so that's the realpolitik response to consumption of non-human animals. Now I'd like to look at sort of how Jewish law grapples with this, because I do believe that there's an inherent compassion streak within the rabbinical tradition. And underneath the category that says forbidden to cause pain to animals, the third from the bottom hits it as a nutshell of what Jewish law is. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is a collection of law. This is a law tradition. This is not the Bible. This is not the nice philosophy of a thinker, a theologian from the 12th century. This is the teachings that are being concretized into a legal code book. It says there that it is forbidden, according to the law of the Torah, to inflict pain upon any living creature. On the contrary, it is our duty to relieve the pain of any creature, even if it is ownerless or belongs to a non-Jew. So, sorry for the xenophobia. All religious traditions have a long history of fear of other religions, and xenophobia is built into that. That's my disclaimer for that. It's particularly hard doing this after an atheist speaks, I got to be honest. When horses drawing a cart come to a rough road or a steep hill, and it is hard for them to draw the cart without help, it is our duty to help them, even when they belong to a non-Jew, because of the precept not to be cruel to animals. Please suspend the xenophobia again. Lest the owner smite them to force them to draw more than their strength permits. It is forbidden to tie the legs of a beast or of a bird in a manner that is to cause them pain. So the essence of this law is what we call tsa'ar ba'alei chayim, which basically translates as animal cruelty. It is against Jewish law to commit acts of animal cruelty. Now you might say, as vegan animal rights activists, well, isn't eating them kind of cruel? Yes, I agree. But we have to put it in the context of history and the way the world was, and the way the world may be going is not necessarily the way the world was. So it just goes back to everything I've been saying. Speciesism has been around for centuries. I would say millennia. So it's in that context that this happens. Moving back to the top of this section, the second one, Deuteronomy 25:4. You shall, this is the Bible, it says, you shall not muzzle the ox when he is threshing, or he threshes out the corn. So there you go. You're not allowed to muzzle an ox because it needs to be able to eat. It has to be able to live in this world. You may say, well, that's not great because you're making animals do work. I agree. But in a pre-modern society where animal agriculture was alive and well, this was meant to be an act of compassion. And you can't just ignore the sources because this, according to the tradition, is straight from Mount Sinai and from God. Right below it, you shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. Well, why should we not have two animals of different species plowing together? Anyone have any idea? Yeah, one animal is going to be really strong. The ox is going to be able to move with greater physical strength than the donkey. Right? Because look at the size and their capacities. You're not allowed to put them together because it's seen as an act of animal cruelty to do so. So from that, we have this law. And if you drop down to number 4, I want to read, actually, here's the counter to all the negatives that I've been saying. I'm going to give you a slightly positive. The book of Ecclesiastes that you have here, chapter 3, verse 19. It's just a couple down. I'm going to start it a little earlier. So this is from the Hebrew Bible. Oh, gosh, 10 minutes. Gosh, I'm moving too slowly. This is from Ecclesiastes, one of the Hebrew Bible books. It says, I mused. This is sort of King Solomon having a conversation with himself about the meaning of life. He says, I mused. God will doom both righteous and wicked, for there is a time for every experience and for every happening. And so I decided, as regards men, pardon the gender, to dissociate them from the divine beings and to face the fact that they are beasts. For in respect of the fate of man and the fate of beast, they have one and the same fate. As the one dies, so dies the other, and both have the same life breath. Man has no superiority over beast, since both amount to nothing. Both go to the same place. Both came from dust, and both return to dust. So, if any of you are really down and out and you want to read a book of the Bible that'll kind of get to your misery, read the book of Ecclesiastes. It's pretty fantastic. It's probably my favorite book of the Bible. So that's that. So that was a slightly anti-speciesist statement. And look at the first text in this section. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, But the seventh day is a Sabbath unto God. You shall not do any manner of work. You, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger within your gates. There's an equivalence that's being made that working animals and working humans is wrong. Now, we might say, well, I don't want to work animals. That's not right. But again, we're applying a 21st century attitude to a 1000 BCE perspective. Drop down to Nachmanides. He's about 6 or 7 down. Living creatures possess a soul and a certain spiritual superiority, which in this respect make them similar to those who possess intellect. And they have the power of affecting their welfare and their food, and they flee from pain and death. And by the way, Nachmanides was against the practice of kaparot. Just so you all know, not everybody agrees with kaparot, and I don't want to get into it right now. It's a whole other conversation. But let's just point to the fact that the vast majority of Jews do not do kaparot, and even within Orthodox circles, very few are. Yeah. Kaparot is the chickens that I was mentioning at the beginning that are used in a ritual to expiate sin. You take the chicken between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur during the Jewish high holidays. You put it over the penitent and say, "This is my release. This is my expiation. My sins will basically be passed on to this animal, and as it dies, I will be expiated of sin." Kind of a crazy tradition, and that's why it's not particularly favorable, but we're still working to eliminate it outright. But he was against the tradition for a whole bunch of reasons, one of them being the cruelty that it creates, but another one being that it does not feel very Jewish, and I agree. It doesn't feel very Jewish. Okay, so we're running low on time, so I'm not going to read the Maimonides quote, but that one's a really good one about how to treat animals, sort of an animal welfare perspective. Okay, we're on to the second page. Dropping down to Messianic times, return to Eden. So we were in Eden, the Garden of Eden, then we left it, and now we're imagining what it'll be like to go back. I think people know this quote from Isaiah. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together, with a little boy to herd them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion, like the ox, shall eat straw. A babe shall play over a viper's hole, and an infant pass his hand over an adder's den. In all of my sacred mount, nothing evil or vile shall be done. So that's actually a return to Genesis, because it wasn't just humans that were not allowed to eat animals. Animals, if you read the text, were not allowed to eat animals. And then something happened, and the world fell apart, and we've been trying to recover ever since. But there is this idea that in this end of time, there's something that we're aspiring toward. And this aspiration this is a big conversation in Jewish tradition. Is it going to be natural or supernatural? This is one of those texts that suggests something more supernatural. We don't really have the Christian notion of a Messiah that is, that has already come, as I think everyone understands. But we do have this idea of a messianic era and a time when utopia will be reined in. And so what I love about this source is just how visual and how biodiverse it is, and just how poetic the notion is, and it reminds us that we have a lot of fellow beings on our planet. So I will just say that, again, we have a speciesism. Nothing says that you're not allowed to eat meat. In fact, there does come this idea, not that you have to eat meat, but that and that's important to understand. We're not saying that you have to eat meat in Judaism. There's no one who can make that argument. There's one little statement that says that on Shabbat and at particular moments of the year when things are heightened, at that time you might consume extra meat and wine, two luxuries. But the rabbis never imagined the farming of animals. They never imagined the amount of meat of animals that we would be consuming in our bodies. They never imagined the kind of heart disease and all the misery that an animal-based diet has created for so many people, including the workers in those farming factory farms, right? Never. So understanding that there was a sense that meat was a luxury and not a daily intake, we put all of these laws about meat consumption in context. Non-vegan means speciesism. There's no way around it. So it's the fundamental problem of people eating and enjoying meat in this world, eating animals, and how do you deal with that speciesism? So, but we also have to remember we have other problems too, like racism. We don't just have to go outside of human beings to be hierarchical, patriarchal, destructive to our fellow earthlings. We can look even within our own community and look at how racism plays itself out. And if you want to go further, how about sexism? How about that election on November 8th, 2016? Okay, so, and I think, by the way, if there was any critique I would make about the conversations today, it's that we're not talking enough about the political and how we are a part of making movement in this world, if we so choose, and how we have to organize. So that's just my aside, and I guess that's for the next panel. So the bottom line is, and I'll highlight one thing with my 1 minute left. Covenant with animals. Animals have their own covenant with God. It's not just human beings who are in relationship with God, and there's two sources that point that out. Bottom line is, ancient tradition, thousands and thousands of adherents of an ancient tradition. Do we just dismiss all of those people, or do we see an opportunity? I want to commend the Grecias and the UUA folks and the Jewish Veg people and the Shemaim Va'aretz and all of these groups, and I'll even commend myself, why not, for recognizing that there's power in religious communities. And you know what? I would love to see an atheist group join this as well, and we'll be very cautious about how to do it so that everyone feels welcome. The other side is defining all of this as, they're putting division in. They insert political arguments to break our voices as religious people, whether it be abortion, whether it be same-sex marriage, whether it be the role of women in clerical life. But what we know is that all of our religious traditions have a great deal of power and capacity to do a lot of good in the world. And our job is to keep our traditions honest, in tune with their best teachings, grapple with the hard stuff, and pass the policies that make a difference, a real difference in the lives of animals besides humans as well as of humans. So I want to thank you for the opportunity.